Okay, I think we should start. Welcome everyone to the first of a series of lectures delivered by Dominique Moisi, visiting research professor at King's. My name is Christoph Meyer. I'm the head of Department of European and International Studies, and I will be chairing this event tonight. I'm very happy that we have a full house here, and I know that Professor Moisi is very much looking forward to receiving comments from the audience as his work is progressing, and he's looking forward to learning from the debate that we hopefully have here today. Just a couple of words about Professor Moisi, who will be very well known to many of you. I see some of my students here from France who will be very familiar with Professor Moisi. He's been the founder and is a senior advisor at the French Institute for International Relations, IFRI. He's also a professor at the Institut d'études politiques, Sciences Po in Paris, and a visiting professor not only at King's but also at the Harvard University and the College of Europe in Nathalie. You will have seen many of his contributions, some of them not just in academic journals and with academic publishers, but he's been regularly contributing to public debate in quality news media such as Financial Times, Die Welt, Foreign Affairs, and the Project Syndicate. So he's very much someone who can reach beyond the normal scholarly discourse, and he's very much involved in shaping public debate in the area of international affairs. His most recent and probably most well-known book is Geopolitics of Emotion, How Cultures of Fear, Humiliation, and Hope Are Reshaping the World. And his lecture is a way of updating and further developing some of the thoughts that he has put forward in this book from 2009. Now, I think the theme of this lecture series is a fascinating one. It cuts across many different disciplines and is relevant to many of the problems I think we're facing today in contemporary debates. Clearly, one of the debates in international affairs has been surrounding the impact of the events of 9/11 and the war on terror, and the whole question of whether the West and the United States in particular have become too fearful and have been overreacting in a number of ways and have in the process undermined civil liberties. In the academic domain, there is of course a school of theoretical approaches that you may recognize from your studies, such as the Copenhagen School, that looks at securitization and the extent to which fear can be instrumentalized by different actors and different institutions to bring about change that would not ordinarily be possible. And this school of thinking highlights that fear is not only something that poses analytical questions, i.e. questions about why is it that we're fearful, about what is it that we are fearful, what can explain why particular groups or countries are more fearful than others about a particular phenomenon, but I think it is also very much tied up with questions about criticism. Are we too fearful? Are we becoming irrational? Are we overreacting? What is it that fear does to us? And how should we critique the status of fear? But clearly, when we are looking at other debates, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to technologies, there's also a sense that maybe we are not fearful enough about particular phenomena, that we are not, that we are maybe complacent, that we are not maybe taking care of particular risks that are coming towards us and are willfully ignorant. So there are different aspects, different approaches to the topic of fear in different disciplines, and I think we can be very grateful that we have someone here who can combine these different approaches into an overarching discussion. So combining a political perspective, an economic perspective, and quite crucially a psychological approach to fear, and to also link the national with the international and the global level, because clearly fear is something that is can be a transnational phenomenon now as well. So I'm very, very grateful to give the floor now to Professor Moisi and look forward to his first lecture, which I understand will be an exercise in stage setting, elaborating the main approaches, whereas in the following sessions we will be going to particular themes. And before I hand over, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that this has been hosted and organized by the King's Policy Institute, and Nick Butler is here with us and made possible, and is also situated in the Europe in Crisis project that is hosted by KPI, and that provides, I think, a useful and very contemporary context to discussions about fear. Maybe not quite, we're not maybe quite as fearful as we used to be about the collapse of the euro and all sorts of other consequences, but I think there's still a sense that the fear is not quite behind us yet. So thank you very much, and
thank you very much for your very kind introduction. Well, a few years ago, in 2009, I published a book called The Geopolitics of Emotion, How Cultures of Fear, Humiliation, and Hope are Shaping the World. And in 2013, I felt the urge to update that book, to see whether the themes that I had chosen were still valid, and in what direction emotions had been moving. In the original book, I concentrated on those three emotions: fear, humiliation, and hope, because I felt that in order to understand the international system, these were the most valid emotions. There are so many emotions: resentment, love, hatred, whatever. But those three emotions, fear, humiliation, and hope, had all something in common. They were reflecting a particular reaction, relation to the concept of confidence. And confidence for an individual or confidence for a collectivity are truly essential. Hope, in my mind, was confidence. You are looking at someone in the eyes and you say, you will see, I'm going to make it. In the world of hope, there is the feeling that today is better than yesterday, but tomorrow will be better than today. By contrast, in the world of fear and humiliation, there is a lack of confidence. In the world of humiliation, there's not even a vision of what the future can be. There is a glorification of the past, a dark criticism of the present, and nearly no vision of the future. But in some ways, the terrorists of 9/11 were the starkest illustration of that phenomenon. I remember an interview granted after the event by the brother of one of the kamikaze, and he was reminded after the events of what his brother had told him. He said, either I'm going to make it big in Wall Street, or I'm going to turn to ashes those arrogant symbols of Western power. So the sentence was, I cannot join you, but I can reduce you to the level in which I find myself. And in the culture of fear, there was a sense that the present was darker than the past, but still brighter than the future. So there is a future, but a very negative vision of that future. A feeling that the world is aggressing you and that you don't have any longer the necessary ingredients to face that world with success. And looking at what I would call a mapping of the emotions of the world, I found in 2009 that there was more hope in Asia behind the growth of China and India in particular, but other Asian countries. There was more fear in the Western world, clearly in Europe, but also in the United States. And there was more humiliation in the Arab Muslim world. And in 2013, looking back at those definitions and this balance sheet of the emotions of the world, I came to the conclusion that, in fact, there was probably slightly less hope in Asia, even more fear in the Western world, and probably a mixture of resentment, humiliation in the Arab Muslim world following what was initially called the Arab Spring, but which I would personally call, for reason I will elaborate later, the Arab revolutions with an F at the plural. And this, in a way, this prevalence of fear as the dominating emotion of the world could seem surprising. If you look at demography and if you consider the rise in life expectancy in the world, it doesn't go well with a culture of fear. If you look at demography and the fact that we are going to be many, many more in the decades to come, it doesn't go well with fear. I mean, I was told by a very respected professor at Oxford University, specializing in aging, that every baby that is being born today, well, 50% of them will be centenarian. That's a revolution. I mean, to come back to one country, I looked carefully in the Geopolitics of Emotion to explain its hope, China. The life expectancy of Chinese has risen by nearly 36 years between 1960 and 2010. a demographic revolution. And so, that's a strange contrast. We live longer, will be many more. In some countries like France, we are fearful, pessimistic collectively about ourselves, and we keep making children at a rate that is surprising everyone. With that contrast between individual optimism and collective pessimism. Now, if you take a more historical vision, why should the 21st century be described today, in 2013, as the century of fear by some very serious analysts? In the High Middle Ages, when one spoke of the great fear of the West, one had in mind the Vikings invading us. In the 14th century, described by Barbara Tuchman as the dark century, there was a combination of plague and war. The 17th century, as a result of the 30 Years' War, what was then the geographic space containing Germany was reduced demographically by half. In 1618, the population of that geographic space that is today Germany was populated by 48 million people. And in 1648, at the time of the Westphalia Treaty, that population had been reduced to 18 million as a result of the indirect consequences of war, famine, and plagues. But it has nothing to do with the 21st century. Why are we collectively so afraid of our future? What's missing? What is the guiding thread that would contribute to explain this rising prevalence of fear amongst all other emotions? Well, I think the key word is control. The key word in what I looked at in the Geopolitics of Emotion was confidence. The presence, absence of confidence. In the world of 2013, the key concept is that of control. But control in a very paradoxical manner. There is a dual fear of having lost control of our environment or of being excessively controlled by forces beyond our understanding. Fukushima, for a few hours, there is the terrible fear that man has lost control of the atom. Doesn't last long, but for a few hours, the technicians of the company that runs the nuclear central, the nuclear plant, are clearly saying, we don't know what to do. the earthquake was too strong. The tsunami was too violent. We had not predicted what is happening in front of our eyes. And so you have very strongly that sense of a loss of control. We have invented incredible energies. The progress of technology have been huge, and now man is a victim of its hubris. We overreach. Now we are about to pay a price for that. If you look at the fear of terrorism, in a way, it is similar to the fear of Fukushima. But in that case, we fear the direct actions of man. It's not man losing control over the nuclear energy, it's man seizing control, possibly tomorrow, of weapons of mass destruction. Nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. We cannot control them any longer. They are within us. The terrorists of 2005 in London were born in Great Britain. The terrorists that attack in the Boston Marathon were American citizens. They were living in America. They had been, one thought, integrated. The great economic crisis, which started in 2007 and went on up till today, has been also characterized by the feeling of the loss of control. There is the sense of the direct consequences, not of the hubris of man, but of the infectious greed of an industry, the financial industry. Lord Turner has a very nice comparison. He says, which industry would launch product without testing them? Could the automobile industry do it? Could the pharmaceutical industry do it? Well, he says, the financial industry did it. And that is the subprime crisis. No wonder we lost control, because we lost understanding. The vice president of Lehman Brothers was presented with those schemes and says, I don't understand anything. But the president said to him, I don't understand either, but they promised me a 2 figures growth. How can we resist that? So that is the sense, on the one hand, of a loss of control over situation. But you have exactly the opposite situation, which means that there is excessive control over your fate. That can come from Big Brother, that can come from the NSA, as revealed by the so-called Snowden affair, and to a large extent, populist parties all over the world are being fed by the two elements, the two dimensions of control. On the one hand, take the Tea Party, they will denounce the abuses of the government. They will say, we cannot accept proposals for reform by an American president, proposals which have only one objective in mind: to control the result of the future election, to make sure that the new Americans are going to vote Democrat. It's an anti-American plot to control the heart and mind of the new Americans. And this fear of big government, of being controlled by big government, is met, is reinforced by another fear, which is this government, which wants to control the minds of those new Americans, is not controlling the access of migrant workers into America. So it's the two dimensions of control that are leading to what I would call the party of fear. We see very clearly in all the studies made in the United States about the Tea Party that the brand of populism that it represents is very much xenophobic. It's very much anti-immigrants. It's majority white, middle-aged, conservative against the other and against the government. And if you look at populist parties all over Europe, and we will look at it in another session when we look at Europe very closely as a subject, this duality of fear about excessive control of the government and lack of control over the destiny of your country at large constitute, I would probably think, the specificity of populism today. It's both. And of course, in Europe, it's the idea that you lose control over your national destiny because your fate depends from Brussels. You don't understand. And at the same time, the abstract, non-incarnated nature of the power that is there. Brussels looks as a kind of monstrous, anonymous figure of which you can only be fearful because you don't understand it. I think there is one key dimension to go further the concept of control. And that is very much linked to the sense that no one is in charge of the international system in which we live. This is slightly more intellectual, but at the level of public opinion, it manifests itself in a sense of gloom and doom about the future. The world has become too complex. It's the famous Woody Allen sentence. Let me go down. It's like you are in a train, you don't know which direction the train is taking. Suddenly the train moves faster. Woody Allen takes the alarm system. Let me step down. I don't want to go further. And there is, I think, an element of that. So, of course, one has the feeling that what was called in the past the concert of Europe, which means the dialogue, which Kissinger described in his book Diplomacy as harmonious between the various state actors, which were homogeneous because they represented nation state, be they empire, national countries, monarchy, or democracies, whatever. Homogeneous because the people who represent these various actors came from the same social background, understood each other spontaneously. Homogeneous because they shared the same values. Basically, they wanted the status quo to remain. Well, of course, this harmonious concert of European nations ended tragically. Those rules did not prevent Europe from committing suicide between 1914 and 1945. But if you compare this period with the world of today, you are confronted with what I would describe as the cacophony of the world, by opposition to the concert of nations. And here you see the heterogeneity of the actors. Some actors are state. Some actors are transnational forces. Some actors are groups, terrorists. Some actors are major multinational companies. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same interest. They are deeply heterogeneous in their essence. And suddenly, as the world has become more complex, we realize that there's no pilot in the plane. The United States is neither the empire nor the umpire, the referee. And there is a sense that no one is replacing the United States. You can be very pleased by the fact that America is no longer what it used to be. And largely as a result of the adventurous mission, wars, America has engaged in, particularly in the last 10 years. They are paying a price for Iraq and Afghanistan. Americans are tired of wars, and America is ruined by wars. But no one else is playing an alternative role. So you have no America and no outside referees, because the United Nations remain what they were, the representation of the divided states. And so when Russia does not want a military action in Syria, it can block the legitimacy of such an action helped by China. So you have that sense that the world is suddenly escaping not only the understanding but the control of the actors. And it is taking that path, taking that road, precisely at a moment when there is a need for understanding, for control, for mastering of the situation, because one of the key regions of the world is in the midst of a revolutionary process. And for Europeans, this revolutionary process is taking place just on the other side of the Mediterranean. And it combines the elements of two historical moments known by Europe. The principle of revolution, like the French Revolution, the encounter between the accidental and the inevitable, the long duration. We are just at the very beginning of that long process. A counter-revolution has already taken place in one of the countries affected by revolution, Egypt. But who knows what's going to happen in other countries? And at the same time, beyond the analogy with the French Revolution, there is the analogy with the religious warfares of Europe in the 16th and 17th century. Shiite and Sunni are slaughtering each other. Countries like Iraq or Syria, not to mention Lebanon, the way Christians were divided between Protestant and Catholic, in particular during the 30 Years' Wars. So there is the sense that unfortunately there's no one in charge. At the very, very moment, someone should be in charge. What's going to happen to us? There are Muslim minorities, very large, in Europe. How do they live the events that are happening on the other side of the Mediterranean? The French Interior Ministry has announced that 250 French citizens of Muslim religion have joined the war in Syria. They are on the side of the jihadists against the Bashar al-Assad regime. Some of them are Europeans, French. They convert to Islam, and with the energy of the newly convert, bored to death by their life, they went in Syria in order to give a meaning to their life. And of course, that creates a sense of fear around them. What are they going to do when they return? How many more will go there? Which you have here again to find answers to. So I would say that the rise of fear in the Western world has been clear and following the patterns of the economic crisis, of the instability in the Middle East, of the denunciation of government, of denunciation of Brussels, because Europe is clearly suffering from this rise of fear within the midst of its citizens. The rise of fear is also clear in the United States of America, with the continuation of incidents of violence which have nothing to do with terrorism in most cases, but which nevertheless feed an environment of, here again, uncertainty, instability, with the answer, we have to arm ourselves even more, which is the opposite of the attitude which could seem logical to others. But in fact, in the emerging East, one senses also the rise of a feeling of fear. And here again, I would say that fear can be very well linked to the concept of control. There is a sentence used by a professor at Harvard University, Roderick MacFarquhar, who's a great specialist of China, and who quote a Chinese dissident intellectual. And the sentence is as follows: if we do not tackle corruption, the country is doomed. But if we do tackle corruption, the party is doomed. And that sentence, in a way, seems, in a very abbreviated, strong manner, to summarize the feeling of uncertainty, if not fear, that is present at the highest level of power in China. Can we go on? Will we be able to check on the urge for opening that are visible in Chinese society? How can we slowly open and keep our instrument of control? If we move to Russia, you see another attitude. In fact, here, the government of Russia has played the fear card in the most obvious and open way. We have been humiliated. We have been aggressed. Russia is back, thanks to me, Putin. And I'm restoring the sense of pride of this great imperial nation. I told you before that the darkest moment in the 20th century was neither Verdun nor Auschwitz, but the disappearance of the Soviet Union. Now I'm telling you that you are back as a great nation. And it's good you're back because you need to be in control. We are masters in realpolitik. Look what we did against those amateurish Americans during one key moment of the Syrian crisis. And we need to be in control because there are within us Chechens who are willing to blow us up. And there are pieces of Russian land that should return to Russia, that should have never left and should be back one day. And that's, of course, the key issue of Ukraine and Belarus. So, in a way, there is a sense that fear can be resented, can be exploited, can be manipulated, all the more so that there is that feeling that somewhere you are no longer in control. You want to be in control, you're no longer in control. I think the consequences of that evolution have to be analyzed. Fear is a perfectly normal and legitimate emotion. The rabbit who ignores the hunter, the tourist of the Western world, who will go at the boundary of Pakistan and Afghanistan, ignoring all the warnings, is a fool. The rabbit will be killed, the tourist will be kidnapped first and killed after. So, a sufficient element of fear is necessary. It's an ingredient for survival. It's part of our brain. It's natural. When it doesn't exist, it's dangerous. What is dangerous? What is negative? Is excessive fear. Is a vision of the world and of your future, collectively or individually, dominated by fear. If you are dominated by fear, you will not open to others. You will deal with anything slightly stranger in a purely defensive way. And the consequences of that will be very dangerous. A world dominated by fear is not a good one. And so at the end of this seminar, of this series of lectures, we'll try to see what can be done to alleviate the fact that fear is becoming the dominating emotion in our world. Well, I look at my watch. I've used the 45 minutes you very, very generously allocated to me. I suppose I should stop here and open for the debate and questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We can give a first round of applause to Okay, thank you very much. I think we've heard a very wide-ranging treatment of this topic, as I had hoped. So I have a couple of questions myself, but I think I will not exploit this privilege, and I would like to invite you to ask your questions, or if you have comments, maybe if you could also just briefly say your name, if you do,
where you come from.
And where you come from. So please, okay, yes.
It's just a comment. On the one hand,
So where you come from?
Sorry, I'm at UCL. I'm a scientist, so I'm no expert whatsoever about this this topic at all. But just a comment that obviously we all know that fear is a very powerful tool to keep people dominated. It's been through the centuries. It's been the most powerful tool. Knowingly or unknowingly, it's the way that you keep a big mass of people believing the same thing and working towards the same goal. Call it religion, call it kings and tyrants, or call it paranoia. It's very powerful. A lot of policies have resulted as this paranoid feeling that is being inculcated into society. And that is very comfortable. Do you think that on the one hand we have that, but on the other hand society or humanity is growing older? So where before it was equivalent to a child, and therefore being a child is also being very safe, because you get told what is right, what is wrong, and then you just follow. If you're a good boy, you get your brownie. If not, you get a punishment. And as humanity progresses, is that fear also of hang on a minute, now we're responsible for what we're doing. We've created the atomic bomb, and look, it went all wrong. Oh shit, that wasn't like a higher power telling us to do that, that was us. You think there's those two paradoxes, that on the one hand we feel more responsible, therefore we're more fearful?
Okay, thank you very much. Shall we connect or do you?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have more.
Just to follow on
Yes.
that, I am in Algeria because I'm the Turkish ambassador in London. Just to follow on that, how do you explain the correlation between the diminishing hope and increasing fear? Or let us say if what we have heard from the previous question is something to do with the maturity of humanity, that people, as they learn and as they acquire experience, they perhaps are becoming more careful about certain concepts. But if diminishing hope increases, and if hopelessness prevails, does it also lead to fearlessness? And does it also result with calamity?
Okay. One more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Tom Wengraf, London. I think what is lacking for me is sort of a way of connecting it. In the sense that if, as many people think, and I think myself, that the probabilities of self-destruction of the planet, even physically, or as a habitat for humans, is well underway, then I think this is felt in a very broad fashion. There are lots of unevennesses of it, but there is a sort of, to me it seems like a sort of an increasing reality, perception of that reality, which could be very strong in terms of creating a counter movement, and an increasing fear that actually nothing can be done to change it, the loss of control that you talk about. That's sort of, I think, it's about, you talk about the importance of knowing what you should really be afraid of, and I think there is a greater awareness of a species which is not in control of its planet and itself. But the second thing is something to do with deliberate policy, it seems to me, that what Marx said ages ago, which is that the bourgeoisie will be reduced to the condition of the proletariat. And we have increasingly seen the conditions of uncertainty and anxiety as a deliberate, if you read Naomi Klein, the shock doctrine, there are deliberate policies of increasingly small elites creating more and more uncertainty and anxiety in order to extract more value and more profits. So it isn't just by some sort of strange accident that this happens. There is a very definite policy of the reduction of the abolition of the welfare state, the reduction of security, and all the rest of it. So I think that actually it is not just something that happens, it is a policy that is promoted. And part of the fury, I think, that people feel is that actually not everybody is hopeless. Powerful elites are much more powerful than they were before, because any sort of pretense of democratic responsiveness is being systematically liquidated. And that makes people very frightened, because the elites go madder and madder as they have less and less to fear from those they dominate. So I do think a sociological approach is also needed.
Maybe make back last.
But Dominique, I wondered whether you thought that this atmosphere, psychology of fear, made people in different countries more likely to work together or to retreat into national solutions. And thinking of France, do you think that if there is fear in France, do you think that that is more likely now to make them ready to accept German leadership in Europe?
Okay, so I think that's enough for the first round, and then we'll take more questions. So 1, 2 I have here. Please.
Shall I answer the question in the reverse order? I think that when it comes to fear and protection, there is nearly a reflex to go back to the nation state. Europe represents today, with Russia, between 6 and 7% of the world population. It was 20% at the beginning of the 18th century. Taken together, we are small. Individually, we are minuscule. That's the sentence of Angela Merkel, the biggest country, the one France should come for protection, as you said. We are only 1% of humanity, Angela Merkel reminded the Germans during the electoral campaign. So we should come together. But we don't do that because we need the familiarity of the state we denounce so often. That's emotional. We haven't found an alternative to the state. That's the problem of Europe. Brussels cannot protect us. If something unites the European, it's what I would call in French le désir d'impuissance, the will not to have power, the desire for powerlessness. So you retreat behind the nation state, which no longer has the means to protect you. And you need an obvious threat. I mean, you need to see the Soviet tanks rolling again, which is not going to happen, hopefully, to realize that maybe we have to come together. On the questions of the sociological, economical dimension and the growing power of the elite and the way they manipulate the rest, if I go to the gist of your sentence, well, I think the elites are clearly richer. This is one of the elements of globalization. The number of very, very rich people has escalated spectacularly in China, significantly today even in Africa. But wealth and power, wealth and the total absence of fear are not necessarily similar. And I think, no, what I would denounce is the destabilization, the attack on the social fabric created by the growing gap between the very rich and the very poor. One of the conditions of democracy is the acceptability of a gap that is understandable. There were figures that were very interesting in America. In 1973, the gap between the richest CEO and the poorest worker in a factory was between 1 and 40. In 2007, it was between 1 and 400. And in 2013, it's probably between 1 and 600, because this has a way of escalating. But it's not exactly the same thing. And the other element of your question, men endangering the planet, No, I agree with that. I think global warming is a reality, and we shouldn't escape the fact that there are more than 70% chances that global warming is created by man and is not simply the product of a cycle, a long cycle of nature. We have to address that. But I think it's a very interesting question, because you have to oppose societies which fear above all nature and societies which fear above all other men. There was a fascinating book published in the early 70s in Japan called The Japanese and the Jews. And the writer thesis was, well, the Japanese are obsessed by what nature can do to them. And Jews are obsessed by what other men can do to them. It creates different patterns of behavior. The two questions which in fact were linked. Can an increase, can hopelessness lead to an absence of fear? Yes, definitely. This is the attitude of the suicide bomber. This is the attitude of the terrorist. I kill, therefore I exist. But to exist, I must accept to lose my life. It is my death that gives a meaning to my life. This is what we saw in France with the terrorist Mera, who was active in the southwest of France, in the city of Toulouse. It is absolutely correct. We have to give other meanings. I mean, that's a fundamental problem. If religious education is dominated by madrasas who know very little about religion and a lot about an ideology of death, we will multiply the problem. And I think your country, Mr. Ambassador, has played and is still playing a very important role to demonstrate that there's no incompatibility between Islam and democracy, between Islam and modernity. And it should stay that way.
Thank you very much.
I think the two questions were linked.
Yeah, I think that's fine. So we'll have second round of questions, 1, 2, 3 for the moment. Okay, so starting with you.
My name is Nina. I'm from London, and I'm a King's College alumni. I was very interested with your definition of control and splitting it into lacking control and then excessive control. And I was wondering whether you saw one as more powerful, or if you agreed with the idea that both are linked in causal manner. So having a lack of control can lead to the onslaught of excessive controls to combat that, or the other way around, where you're forced into excessive controls. I used recently an example of restrictive
Good. So maybe that's the last one.
Christopher, I live in Bath. I just wondered, I definitely obviously agree there are a number of people that, whether it's like UKIP and parties like that, more populist parties, that there's an element of fear that then leads us towards nationalism and that kind of thing. But do you think there's quite a key role in fear in trying to unite Europe in the sense of the way it looks at China and India as a threat in the economy, Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism? It looks at things like the common agricultural policy, presumably fearful that African farmers will undercut European farmers. And there's the fear that started Europe in a way, or the EU, in terms of war and fascism and communism. Do you think that actually fear is quite a predominant pretext in trying to unite Europe? And like your quote you gave Angela Merkel saying we're getting a smaller and smaller proportion of the population. Is there a way in which fear is driving Europe together as well?
Thank you very much. And the gentleman now.
Michael from the Philosophy Foundation. It's very similar to my question actually, but I heard it slightly differently. That if we live in a world now, we live in Europe where extreme populist ideologies and fascism are reviving, particularly in Hungary and Greece, are we maybe afraid of the wrong things where we're not being able to attention to that and paying more attention to lesser, less probable fears? And also when you mentioned when the US is no longer the empire or empire, is that vacuum likely to be filled, and is that related?
Yeah, the two questions on Europe. Well, it is clear that, especially in countries like Greece or Hungary, there is a perfume of the 1930s that is present. And I speak very consciously of a perfume of, because at the end of the 1930s, as you know, there is World War II. And I don't see a repetition of that. Even if what is very interesting is that you see in the bookshop everywhere books which are commemorating the coming of World War I, a century ago, the year before the storm. And you have a sense, I would say in particular in Asia, that 2013 for them may look like 1913 for us. You hear that in Japan, you hear that somewhere in China. Are we the year before, the way a century ago Europeans were the year before the storm? So there is that sense of analogy in the most fearful manner. But if there is a perfume of the 1930s, it is because of the economic crisis, because of the political crisis, because of the social crisis, because of the ethical crisis. I mean, a feeling that people have been betrayed by corrupted elite. The case of Greece is fascinating from that standpoint. I remember reading at the very beginning of the crisis a comment by a Greek intellectual. He was saying, well, we've been voting for elites that were lying to us about the reality of our situation. And we were voting for them precisely because they were lying to us. We didn't want to hear the truth, because if we were to hear the truth, we would have to change radically our attitude. And that would have been painful, costly. So there is that sense that you go in the direction that is the less costly in the short run and the most tragic and costly in the long run. Now, to say that Europe is playing on the fear of its citizens in order to justify its existence it's probably slightly exaggerated, if I may say, to use understatement. To believe that Europeans in Brussels have the ability to plot a fear theory to make sure that people will follow them. Well, if they did, looking at the popularity of Europe among its citizens, they did a very, very poor job. I mean, looking at the polls about the May 2014 election, they are deemed to be the worst in the history of Europe. Level of abstention reaching the sky, and non-European, anti-European parties, populist parties, making the best score in their life. So if they did plan that, it really did not work. And I don't think, honestly, they did plan that.
Saying they planned that does mean that sometimes the rhetoric you hear of kind of, we need to be fearful of we need a strong Europe to compete globally, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but then, yeah, but that's, I mean, I'll take, if I may, because it's a fundamental point. Let's look at Europe as a security actor. Well, we've seen recently France far ahead of any others in the Syrian crisis. And the Americans and the Russians agreeing on a treaty above the head of the French, above the head of Europe. Oh, you wanted us to go in that direction? Sorry, we didn't inform you, but we are going the other direction. I mean, François Hollande was saying to the French people, be prepared, there might be a strike on Syria on Monday, except that on Friday the British Parliament voted against, and on Saturday the American president said, I'm going to consult with the Congress. And he says that and then called the French. But this is because we don't really exist alone. When Europe speaks with one voice in the field of trade, people listen because we do exist. So from that point of view, I think there is still that difference. On the question you raised first, what is the link between the fear of chaos or the reality of chaos and the coming of an authoritarian regime? It's clear. I mean, take the situation in Russia. Putin could say to the Russians, you've lived 10 years of chaos after the fall of the Soviet Union. These were the Yeltsin years. I am going to restore the dignity of the state, the legitimacy of the state, the authoritarian nature of the state, and you are going to be behind me. Because this fleeting moment of freedom led to nothing except disorder, escalating, uncontrolled corruption, and you are behind me. Up to a point, you see that. But that's clearly a key. On your question, in all honesty, I'm not sure I understood what you had in mind. So if you can summarize it in one sentence, I will try to be fair to it.
Okay, sorry about that.
It's probably my fault.
I guess the question is, if there isn't any particular group or people in control of global politics, but we still get more and more fear, do you think that the global institutions, and even the state institutions that we've created, are kind of locked into propagating those kind of fears? As if they had a kind of agenda or a personality or something of the sort in themselves.
Well, global institutions should benefit from the present situation. There is such a need for a referee that in many ways the world would dream that the symbol of justice, the United Nations, would be endowed with the reality of power. But it goes in precisely the opposite direction. It's not because you need a referee that you're going to get one. International institutions are the direct product of nation states who are fearful of losing their sovereignty, of losing the less sovereignty means something, the more you cling to sovereignty. This is the reality of Europe. The newer you are in the field of sovereignty, because your country has been independent recently, the less you're willing to accept, to share with others. I mean, the continents like Latin America or Africa or whatever are very protective of their sovereignty. They don't want to give to the United Nations because they are afraid that behind the United Nations there is the dirty West with a plot to restore its sovereignty over the world. And in a way, and I will end with that, with the best of intentions, a top European economist, Pascal Lamy, a Frenchman in charge up till a few months ago of the World Trade Organization, stated very specifically the role of Europe, the mission of Europe is to civilize globalization. Beautiful sentence, terrible sentence, because it evokes immediately the mission to civilize of 19th century Europe. We civilize you by imposing our orders upon you. No, we will civilize globalization. And he says that with the best of intentions, with the good conscience of a social democrat, with humanistic and Christian instinct. But it doesn't work. It cannot work because we are in a different world. How can we say to China, we have to civilize you? It's very difficult. It doesn't make sense. It's totally anachronistic. So in a way, we have to be very careful with our choice of words.
Thank you very much. I think we're slowly coming to the end of this lecture, the series of questions. I think maybe there's an opportunity to ask questions afterwards, because I actually want to abuse my privilege to ask one question myself.
That's not very democratic.
It is it not?
Why don't we take that question
and then
your
me?
question?
Okay, you're right. Okay. I thought I can get my perk and okay. So I think we've got these 5 minutes. So if I promise to be brief, and if you could be
and
brief
I
as
give
well.
short answers.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you for your dinner.
Please.
And my name is John from China. I'm actually a student of your department. And as Professor has talked about China, and I just want to raise one question on China. That is, China has really been a hot topic in various kinds of discussions in all fields. And usually, the China grant, this kind of contribute is so very popular among the world. And the Chinese government and the Chinese people always argue that we don't want to grant anybody. We just want to show that our peaceful development line, peaceful development road. It seems that they not so many people are buying it. And I just want to get some advice from you. That's what we should do. Or
Okay, do I fear you?
the second is,
I think one more.
Okay, it's yours now.
Yeah. Okay. There's a saying in Germany which is Vertrauen ist gut, Kontrolle ist besser. It means trust is fine, but control is better. I actually disagree with that, and I was wondering what your view on trust is in all of this. Whether it is not really a question of the world in which we're living is more interconnected, and we have this huge division of labor crossing continents, crossing different groups in ways that is unprecedented, and it's stretching the trust that we normally, the levels of trust that we've been experiencing. So I was wondering whether there's, I mean, maybe I'm going too far ahead towards the end of your lecture series, but is not the solution to build up trust in a new way, to think about how trust is generated, and to also think about the different levels of trust that may well exist, because in some countries there's still a strong trust in the nation state. In other countries, looking at I don't know, Poland or Italy, they are looking towards other institutions, other forms of well, they are maybe they are more easily convinced that the solution, that they are more happy to trust other nations or other forms of collaboration. So I just wondered whether you had some thoughts on trust, because you haven't really mentioned it in your lectures.
Well, do I trust China, and do I trust trust? Well, let me put that way. I don't fear China. I don't think the ambition of China is to replace America in the world. Americans would not accept it, by the way. No, but there are important elements of dialogue and trust that can be reinforced between the United States and China. And that will be the key to the next decades, whether you manage to find a new balance, a new equilibrium. That means for the United States to accept the fact of their relative decline and the fact that they're no longer alone in the world. And for China, the fact that their ambition, I repeat, is not to replace the United States as the #1 country in the world. And I will elaborate further on during the course of my seminar. I don't want to be too long. We passed the time. To your question, it's a very well. There is a Franco-German dimension to it, which is so obvious. the cynical Frenchman putting Geopolitics on his front and saying, look at this naive German. He think trust should be the main card. And I think, I would say you're right. If there is no trust, if you consider that trust cannot be an important element in the working of the international system, it's a recipe for catastrophe. But trust must be checked and based on certain elements. And here I would conclude by saying that if your destiny, because you are no longer an actor on the security and diplomatic field, totally depends upon others, the issue of trust becomes difficult. Europe wants to be a model. I'm glad. But you will not be considered a model if you are no longer an actor. And an actor has to be a multi-dimensional actor. I don't want Europe to return to be a military giant, but I want Europe to have the minimum of military force to be able to go on with trust.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all, and I hope I see many of you, all of you, at the forthcoming lectures. So have a good evening.